I want to share some thoughts that I have about Chief Midegah. So, to give some background, back on my LDS mission around 2000 to 2002, I was in Sudbury, Ontario, and I was street contacting outside of a Indian outreach center, some sort of Indian center, fellowship center, I think it was called. So when I was contacting, I met this Indian, and he was a young guy. He was really put together, and he just looked at me with disgust, kind of almost like frustration. It was really strange, but his message was, book, we already know all that. That's our story. You guys have no idea what you have. And I was like, wait, Book of Mormon? Like, Jesus visiting Americas? He's like, of course. He's like, that's our story. And I was like, you don't want to join? And he was just, you have no idea what you have. So that really struck me as odd. So now here we have this Chief Midegah guy, and interesting enough, he is going to Sudbury, Ontario, which makes me extra intrigued with him. He says a lot of really interesting things that strike me as relevant. Now, one line of questioning of him that is interesting is he claims that the Native Americans have some sort of authority for some sort of ordinances, and that those ordinances resemble strongly the LDS Temple Endowment. Okay, the idea that they can have priesthood. I've had a thought. So here we go. I find the distraction with polygamy as a fascinating thing, because nobody in arguing about polygamy quotes in the Bible where it gives the provision for it. Apologize, I don't have my scriptures in front of me, but trust me, go check it out yourself. But Exodus 20 is when the 10 Commandments are listed. After the people essentially say, God, we don't want to hear your voice. Moses, we're going to listen to you. God says, okay. And then he immediately starts into teaching. Okay. So the first thing that God kind of reiterates is proper worship. So sacrificial worship, we recognize this as symbolic. Okay. Next thing, he talks about bonded servitude. This is essentially where you have a debt that you can't pay. You can sell yourself into servitude and pay off the debt. This is symbolic of our relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay. Next thing is polygamy. It says if a man desires another wife, that her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not be diminished. So, first wife, second wife, they're equal. Now, I find it strange that in the arguments about polygamy that I never hear this quoted, because this is the rules if you're going to have polygamy. Now, the thing that struck me is, isn't it interesting that as a Latter-day Saint people, a people that have been married to the groom, that we were challenged directly with polygamy. And yet, I'm looking at polygamy now as a beautiful metaphor towards if my husband, Jesus Christ, God, however you want to conceptualize that, if he chooses someone else to be in his house, that my food and my raiment and my duty of marriage will not be diminished. They take nothing away from me. God will still give me everything. It's really symbolic. Now, here we are in a time where you have something that we've looked forward to, where people are supposed to come forth with their records and their great treasures. Isn't one of the greatest treasures the clothing or the priesthood that they were clothed with? Doesn't it make sense that they would still have it? It just makes sense. Now, whether or not David Midegah will be able to unite the tribes. That's yet to be seen. I hope he does. I hope that all righteousness is gathered from whatever the source. If God has another bride that has priesthood and ordinances and authority, let them shine forth, because it's diminishing nothing from me. God wants me to do the best I can with what I have, and isn't that our challenge? I do find it interesting that David Midegah, he has a Latter-day Saint background, and it's fascinating to see him talk about how Latter-day Saints have their authority, and you can't steal that from them, and it's their possession. This just makes sense. I have one thing to pick a bone with David Midegah about. I heard him talk about the mosquito and how they have their life force, and that you should give them a little blood, move on. I don't care. I hate mosquitoes. They're the worst, and they're eating me alive right now. So that was the gist of what I wanted to share. We shall see.